I'm not beautiful enough for you. Send me back." Clara Whitfield said it herself before anyone could say it first. She had stepped off that stagecoach in Red Willow, Montana, heard the whispers tear through the crowd like a cold wind, and she beat them all to it. 25 years of being told she was the wrong kind of woman had taught her one survival skill: wound yourself before the world does it for you. The wealthy cowboy she had traveled 4 states to marry said nothing for a long moment. Then he picked up her bag. "You're all I need," he said. "Now let's go home." Subscribe to our channel, follow Clara's story all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. We want to see exactly how far this story travels. Clara Whitfield had learned to make herself small long before the morning she stepped off the stagecoach in Red Willow, Montana. She had learned it at 7 years old, when her aunt pulled her aside before a church social and whispered with practiced gentleness that Clara should stand near the back, not because she had done anything wrong, but because her face made people uncomfortable. The scar near her left eyebrow, thin as a thread and pale as old ivory, had come from a fall in the barn the previous winter. Her aunt had not meant to be cruel. Clara understood that. But the understanding had not made the lesson any easier to carry. She had learned it again at 16, when a boy named Thomas Hayes had walked her home from a harvest dance 3 evenings in a row and then disappeared entirely once his friends began teasing him. She had never asked him to explain. She already knew. She had learned it at 22, when a marriage arrangement had been made and then quietly dissolved after the groom's family paid a visit and decided Clara was not the kind of woman who would reflect well on their name. The letter they sent was polite. It was the politeness that had hurt the most. By 25, Clara Whitfield had made peace with a truth she believed was simply the architecture of her life. She was the kind of woman who filled practical roles. She could cook, manage accounts, preserve vegetables for winter, nurse the sick, and carry more than her share of any burden placed before her. She was useful. She was reliable. She was the woman other women called when something needed doing, and no one else wanted to do it. She was not the woman anyone chose. So when the letter arrived from a land broker named Edgar Sutton, offering a marriage arrangement with a Montana ranch owner named William Hartwell, Clara's first response had been to set it on the kitchen table and walk away from it. She had left it there for 3 days. She had made her meals around it. She had gone to bed at night thinking about the practical absurdity of the thing. A man like William Hartwell, if the broker's description was accurate, had no reason on earth to need a woman like her. It was her younger sister Ruth who had finally pushed her toward it. "What exactly do you have to lose?" Ruth had asked, standing at the kitchen door with flowers still on her apron. "Your pride. Clara, honey, you've been protecting your pride for 25 years, and I love you. But what has it bought you?" Clara had not answered. "You have a good heart," Ruth said, softer now. "You work harder than anyone I know. You're the smartest woman in this county, and half the men in it are too stupid to see it. Maybe this one is different." "He won't be," Clara said. "Then you come home, and at least you tried." She had tried. She had written her first letter to Edgar Sutton 3 days later. Her handwriting steady, even when her hands were not. She had answered every question in the intake questionnaire with brutal honesty. Her age, her appearance, the scar, her lack of formal education beyond what the local schoolhouse provided, her family's modest circumstances. She had not softened a single detail because she had decided that if this arrangement was going to fall apart, it would fall apart before she invested hope in it. Edgar Sutton had written back within 2 weeks. The arrangement still stood. She had told herself not to feel anything about that. She had failed. The journey from Laramie to Red Willow had taken 3 days by stage, with 2 overnight stops at roadside inns that smelled of old smoke and wet wool. Clara had shared the coach with a traveling salesman, a minister returning to his congregation after a bereavement, and a woman named Mrs. Aldrich, who was visiting her daughter and who had talked for the better part of 6 hours about the importance of first impressions. "A man wants to see a woman who carries herself well," Mrs. Aldrich had announced, as if delivering scripture. "Confidence, Miss Whitfield. A man reads confidence the way he reads weather. If the sky looks uncertain, he finds shelter somewhere else." Clara had nodded and looked out the window and tried to calculate how many more hours remained until she could stop listening. But when the stage rolled into Red Willow and she saw the town, saw the faces already gathering at the edge of the platform, already looking toward the arriving coach with the particular hungry interest of people who had been waiting for something to happen, she had felt Mrs. Aldrich's words land on her like stones. She had stepped down from the coach anyway. The whispers had started before her second foot touched the ground. She heard them without being able to separate the individual words, the way you hear thunder before you can count the seconds. She knew the sound. She had heard it in church lobbies and general stores and the edges of barn dances her entire life. It was the sound of people measuring her and finding the total disappointing. She had lowered her eyes. She had reached for her bag, and then a man's voice close enough to be directed at her, but quiet enough that only she could hear it said, "Send her back." Clara went completely still. She did not look up immediately. She organized her grip on the bag handle first the way she always organized small physical tasks when the ground shifted under her. Then she looked. The man who had spoken was not William Hartwell. She understood that immediately. He was shorter, thickly built, with a vest that had seen better years, and the particular expression of a man who considered himself an authority on things that were none of his concern. He was standing near the stage office door with two other men, both of whom were now studying the ground or the sky or anything that was not Clara's face. She did not know his name. It did not matter. What mattered was that William Hartwell was standing 20 feet away, and he had heard it. He was taller than she had expected. Clara had not spent much time imagining what William Hartwell looked like, because imagining had always felt like a luxury she could not afford. But standing here now, watching him cross the platform toward her with a measured, unhurried stride, she registered the details in rapid succession. Broad shoulders, dark coat, the kind of weathered face that came from years of working outdoors, rather than from age and eyes that were even from this distance paying attention. He had heard the remark. She could tell by the slight deliberateness of his walk, the way he was choosing each step. He was not hurrying, but he was not wandering either. He was a man making a decision about where he was going and communicating it without words. He stopped in front of her. He did not look at the scar. Or rather, and she would think about this later, turning it over carefully, the way you turn over an unusual stone. He looked at it for exactly 1 second, the natural glance of a person registering information, and then he moved his gaze to her eyes and left it there. "Miss Whitfield," he said. "I'm William Hartwell. Welcome to Red Willow." His voice was unhurried. It matched his walk. "Mr. Hartwell," Clara said. Her own voice came out steadier than she felt. She had trained it to do that. "I should tell you something before we go any further." "All right. I know I'm not what you were expecting." She kept her eyes level on his, because looking away now would mean she had already lost something she was not willing to lose. "Edgar Sutton sent you a description, I assume. I wrote it myself, and I didn't leave anything out, but descriptions on paper and reality standing in front of you are two different things, and I think you deserve the opportunity to, Miss Whitfield, make a different decision before we've gone too far." "Miss Whitfield." She stopped. "I read your letter 3 times, William said. "Not the questionnaire, the letter you wrote before the questionnaire, the one you sent explaining why you were answering honestly instead of strategically." He paused. "That was the letter that decided it for me." She stared at him. "What letter?" she said. "I didn't write a letter before the questionnaire." Something shifted in his expression. "You wrote half a page explaining that you didn't believe the arrangement would work, but that you were going to be honest anyway because you had decided the world had enough dishonesty in it already." Clara opened her mouth, closed it. She remembered writing that. She had not thought of it as a letter. She had thought of it as an explanation to herself, a way of organizing her thinking before she committed to the questionnaire. She had written it on the same paper and sealed it in the same envelope without entirely meaning to. "Oh," she said. "That half page," William said, "told me more about who you are than any description you could have given." The man near the stage office had gone very quiet. Clara did not look at him. She kept her eyes on William Hartwell and tried to decide whether this was a kindness she should believe in or a kindness she should be careful of. She had not yet decided when he picked up her bag. "Wagons out front," he said. "Mrs. Delaney in the kitchen made enough food to provision a cattle drive. I told her that was excessive. She told me to mind my business." He glanced sideways at Clara with something that might, if she squinted, have been humor. "She's not wrong, usually." Clara followed him. Behind her, she heard someone mutter something that dissolved before she could catch the words. She decided she did not need them. The wagon ride to Hartwell Ranch took 40 minutes, and Clara spent most of it studying the side of William's face while appearing to look at the landscape. He drove the way he walked, deliberate, unhurried, not wasting motion. He asked her questions about the journey. Not the surface questions, the how was the weather, and were the roads manageable questions that people asked to fill silence. He asked whether the minister on the coach had been interesting company because she'd mentioned him in a way that suggested he might be. He asked whether the inn at Casper had fixed the problem with the leaking roof in the east rooms, because it had been leaking last winter when he'd passed through and no one had seemed inclined to address it. How was paying attention to the details she had offered and asking about them specifically. Clara found this unnerving in a way she could not immediately name. "Can I ask you something?" she said when they were perhaps 20 minutes into the ride. "You can ask. Why an arrangement a man with your—" She searched for the word. "A man in your position. Why not simply find someone in the territory?" He was quiet for long enough that she wondered if she'd overstepped. "I tried that," he said finally. "Twice." He didn't elaborate immediately, and she didn't push him. But after another minute he spoke again, still looking at the road. "The first time I was 23. She was a good woman. She chose someone else before I'd worked up the nerve to say what I meant." A pause. "That was my fault, not hers." "And the second time?" His jaw tightened. Barely perceptible, but she caught it. "The second time I was 31. She was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen in my life. Everyone in the county agreed on that. She was—" He stopped. Started again. "I thought we understood each other. Then I had an accident with a fence post. Tore up my right hand pretty badly. The doctor said it would heal, but there would be limitations." He kept his voice completely level. "She came to see me in the infirmary. Sat with me for about 10 minutes. Said she hoped I recovered well." Clara waited. "That was the last time I saw her," William said. "She married a man in Denver before my hand was out of the bandages." Clara looked at his right hand on the reins. She could see the faint, irregular tracery of old scarring along the base of his fingers, barely visible but there. She had not noticed it before. She noticed it now. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm not," he said, and he meant it. She could hear that he meant it. "Because that's when I understood that I had been so busy admiring what she looked like that I had never actually asked who she was. That's my fault too." He glanced at her briefly. "I spent a long time after that being careful about the wrong things." "What do you mean?" "I mean I stopped paying attention to appearances, which sounds admirable." The corner of his mouth moved. "Except I overcorrected and stopped paying attention to people entirely. Easier to manage a ranch than to manage the risk of being wrong about someone." Clara sat with that for a moment. "That is a very honest thing to say to someone you met 40 minutes ago," she said. "You wrote half a page about honesty before you'd even agreed to come," he said. It seemed like the appropriate register. She looked at the road ahead of them. Something in her chest that had been wound tight for approximately 3 days. Approximately. She thought the length of the stagecoach journey, though possibly longer, eased the smallest degree. She told herself not to make too much of that. Hartwell Ranch was larger than she had prepared herself for. She had known the numbers from the broker's information: thousands of acres, significant cattle operation, multiple outbuildings. But numbers in a letter were different from the physical reality of riding through the gate and watching the thing stretch in every direction, farther than the eye found comfortable. It made her feel for a specific disorienting moment, like she had made a mistake in scale. Like she had written a letter intended for one situation and accidentally sent it to a much larger one. A woman was standing on the porch. She was perhaps 60, built like someone who had decided gravity was an inconvenience and refused to accommodate it, with gray hair, pinned with the aggressive efficiency of someone who had better things to worry about than appearance. Mrs. Delaney, William said as he helped Clara down from the wagon. This is Miss Clara Whitfield. I can see that, Mrs. Delaney said. She looked at Clara with the direct assessment of a woman who had sized up a great many people in her lifetime and had no time to pretend otherwise. Are you hungry? I could eat, Clara said. Something in Mrs. Delaney's expression shifted approval. Possibly, though, it was a cautious and preliminary approval. Good. Some of the women they send out here eat like birds and then complain about the cold. Come inside. Clara followed her. At the door, she glanced back at William. He was unhitching the horses, already moving back into the practical rhythms of the ranch, and he didn't look up. She went inside. The kitchen table was set with enough food for 6 people, which Clara registered as either hospitality or a test, and which turned out to be simply Mrs. Delaney's understanding of what constituted a reasonable meal. They sat across from each other, and the older woman watched Clara eat with the unself-conscious attention of someone who believed that the way a person ate told you important things about them. He told you about the hand, Mrs. Delaney said. Clara looked up. Yes, he doesn't tell most people, just so you know what that means. I don't think I do know, Clara said carefully. It means he decided to trust you before he met you. Mrs. Delaney poured more coffee without asking whether Clara wanted it, which is either very wise or very foolish depending on what you do with it. I haven't done anything with it yet. No, but you will, one way or another. She set down the coffee pot. What did you expect when you got off that stage? Clara considered the question seriously, which seemed to be what the woman was asking for. I expected him to be polite about sending me back, she said. I had worked out in my head how long it would take to arrange return passage. Mrs. Delaney picked up her own coffee. What do you think now? I think I don't know what to think, Clara said, which is unfamiliar. Unfamiliar is a place to start, Mrs. Delaney said. Better than arriving already certain. William came in from the barn an hour later, when the light was shifting to the amber side of afternoon, and found Clara in the study off the front hallway. She had not meant to be there. She had been looking for the privy, and had taken a wrong turn, and then she had stopped in the doorway of the study, because the room was filled wall surfaces every available horizontal plane with ledgers. Not disordered ledgers. Arranged ledgers. Arranged with the particular care of someone who was managing a great deal of information and had built the system to handle it. She had been looking at the arrangement, trying to parse the organizational logic, when she heard his step behind her. She turned immediately. I was looking for... It's all right, he said. I took a wrong turn. The study isn't private. He moved past her into the room, which was large enough for both of them without crowding, and picked up a ledger from the nearest shelf with the automatic gesture of someone who knew exactly where everything was. Are you familiar with accounts? Some, she said. My father kept the books for his business. I helped him when his eyes started going. William held the ledger out. She took it. She opened it. The entries were careful and systematic. Income, expenditure, livestock counts, seasonal projections, and for 30 seconds she read through them with the quiet concentration she always brought to numbers. Your winter feed calculations are off, she said. Silence. She looked up. William was watching her with an expression she could not quite categorize. By how much, he said. Maybe 8%. Could be more depending on how hard the winter runs. You've got the projections based on last year's herd count, but the livestock entry 3 pages back shows you bought 40 additional head in April. She turned back 2 pages and showed him. If you're using last year's numbers to project forward, you're going to come up short somewhere around February. He looked at the page, looked at her. How did you... He stopped. Edgar Sutton's questionnaire didn't ask about livestock accounting. No, Clara agreed. It asked if I could manage household accounts. I can. But accounts are accounts. The principles translate. William took the ledger back slowly. He read the page she had shown him, then the page 3 pages. Back then the page she had indicated the projection error on. He was quiet for a full minute. February, he said finally. Approximately, Clara said. I'd want to go through the whole book to be certain. He closed the ledger. He set it on the desk. He looked at her with that same unclassifiable expression, and this time she thought she could almost name it. It was the look of a man who had been moving carefully in a direction he'd half expected to be wrong, and had just found evidence that he might not be. "All right," he said. "All right what?" "All right, go through the whole book." She blinked. "Now, not tonight, but—" He paused. "If you're willing." "I'm willing," she said, and she heard herself say it with a certainty that she had not planned, but that felt completely accurate. That evening after dinner, which William ate with the focused efficiency of someone who treated food as fuel, but who had clearly told Mrs. Delaney to make something worth eating. They sat on opposite sides of the front room, while the lamp threw its warm circumference across the furniture. Clara had her hands in her lap, and was trying to decide whether it would be appropriate to mention that she had brought 3 books in her travel bag, because she always read in the evenings, and she was uncertain of the protocols here, when William said, "You grew up in Laramie." "Outside of it," she said. "My father ran a dry goods supply. We were about 6 miles from the town center." "Brothers and sisters?" "One sister, Ruth." A pause. "She was the one who told me to come. Smart woman." Clara looked at him. He was serious. "She is," Clara said. "She's also the beautiful one in case that's relevant context." Something moved across his face. Not irritation exactly. More like a specific kind of patience, the kind you developed around a wound that kept reopening before it could heal. "Why do you do that?" he said. "What?" "Offer the comparison. Every time you say something about yourself, you find a way to frame it against someone you think is better." He said it flatly, without accusation, as if he were simply noting a fact he'd observed. "You did it at the platform. You did it in the study. I'm not exactly an expert, but you're doing it now." Clara felt heat rise to her face. "I'm being accurate," she said. "You're being preemptive," he said. "There's a difference." She wanted to argue. She sat instead with the discomfort of recognizing he was right. "Old hat," she said finally. "I know," he said, not unkindly. "I had one too. Mine was never telling anyone what I thought until it was too late to matter." He leaned back. "We're both going to have to work on ours." The word both landed in the room and stayed there. Clara had not heard someone include her in a both before. Not in the way he said it, as if it were simply obvious that they were facing the same direction. She didn't know what to do with that. She did what she always did with things she didn't know what to do with. She filed it carefully and left it alone. She had been at Hartwell Ranch for 3 days before she heard Eleanor Brooks's name for the first time. It came from one of the ranch hands, a young man named Danny Alcott, who had a generous open face and the particular verbal carelessness of someone who did not yet understand which pieces of information were loaded. Clara had been in the garden, or rather, she had been looking at the space where a garden should be and making notes about what it would need. And Danny had been passing with a post driver over his shoulder when he stopped and said conversationally that the flower beds used to look real nice when Miss Eleanor came around. Clara set down her notebook. "Miss Eleanor," she said. "Eleanor Brooks," Danny said easily with the tone of someone mentioning a thing everyone knew. "Her father owns the Double Creek spread. She and Mr. Hartwell." He caught himself. A flicker of awareness crossed his face. They were friends, for a while. "Friends," Clara said. "Yes, ma'am." Danny had gone slightly cautious the way young men went when they understood they had walked into something without a map. "She's been in San Francisco, on account of her health. She's been gone, maybe 8 months. Clara said. Danny shifted the post driver. "I'll get on," he said. "Yes," Clara said. "Thank you, Danny." She looked back at the garden space. 8 months, she thought. The broker's letter had come 7 months ago. She filed that piece of information carefully next to the first one and left them both alone. She found the accounting error on the 4th day. Not the feed projections, she'd already identified something else. Something smaller in scale, but more troubling in implication. A series of payments in the ranch's operational ledger that recurred every 6 weeks marked only with initials she couldn't match to any vendor or employee name she had seen in the rest of the accounts. She sat with the ledger for a long time, making sure she was reading it correctly. Then she closed the book and carried it to the barn, where William was working through a harness repair with the focused quiet of a man who thought with his hands. "I found something in the accounts," she said. He looked up. "Something concerning," she added. He set down the harness. She showed him the entries. He looked at them for a long time, longer than she had expected, and she understood from the quality of his stillness that this was not a surprise to him, or rather it was a confirmation of something he had been watching develop at the edges of his awareness without being able to name it. "How long has this been going on?" she asked. "I don't know," he said. "I've been managing a lot of moving pieces. I didn't see it." "Someone wanted you not to see it." He raised his eyes from the ledger to her face. "Yes," he said quietly. There was a pause. "Who has access to the accounts?" she said. "Myself, Mrs. Delaney. My land manager, Boyd Ritter." A pause. "And Edgar Sutton, the broker. He manages some of my outer property arrangements." Clara kept her expression steady. "Edgar Sutton," she said. "Yes." She thought about the letter she had written that had somehow ended up in William's hands. She thought about the 7-month timeline. She thought about the initials in the ledger, and about how a man who brokered land arrangements would also know the accounting patterns of the estates he arranged for. She thought about all of it very quickly and filed it in a structure she could return to. "I think," she said carefully, "we need to go through everything from the beginning." William looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded once. "Then we'll go through everything," he said. And Clara Whitfield, who had arrived in Red Willow, believing she had nothing real to offer, sat down at the desk in the ranch study that evening with the full set of Hartwell ledgers spread before her, a lamp close at hand, and the quiet, determined certainty of a woman who had found something she was built for. Outside, the Montana dark settled over the ranch. A coyote called somewhere in the distance. The lamp burned steady. Inside, Clara worked, and William Hartwell sat across the room and watched her, and did not say a word, and thought about the kind of courage that looked from the outside exactly like a woman doing accounts. The ledgers told a story that had nothing to do with cattle. Clara had been working through them for 4 days straight, early mornings before the ranch hands arrived, late evenings after Mrs. Delaney banked the kitchen fire, and the story they told grew worse with each new page she turned. It wasn't dramatic. Fraud rarely was up close. It was patient and methodical, and built on the assumption that no one was paying close enough attention to notice. Someone had been counting on William's attention being somewhere else. They had been right, until now. She set her pencil down on the morning of the 5th day and pressed her fingers against her eyes. Then she picked the pencil back up and wrote a number at the bottom of her notepaper, circled it twice, and carried the paper across the house to where William was eating breakfast. She set the paper on the table beside his coffee cup without speaking. He looked at it. He looked at her. "That's what's missing," he said. "That's what I can confirm so far," she said. "There may be more in the outer property records. I haven't gotten to those yet." The number was not catastrophic, not compared to the full scope of what Hartwell Ranch was worth. But it was significant enough that someone had gone to considerable trouble to take it, which meant they either intended to take more or were testing what they could get away with. William pushed the paper back toward her. "Keep going," he said. "I will," she said. "But I need you to answer a question first." He waited. "Boyd Ritter," she said. "How long has he been your land manager?" Something in William's expression went very still, not defensive, more like a man watching a door he had kept closed begin to move on its own. 6 years, he said, and before that, he worked for a land brokerage in Helena. A pause. Edgar Sutton's brokerage. Clara sat down across from him. The silence between them had a specific quality. The quality of two people recognizing simultaneously that a picture they had been assembling has just produced an image neither of them wanted to see. "Tell me what you're thinking," William said. "I'm thinking that the initials in the ledger match a pattern that looks like an internal accounting code," she said. "Not a vendor code, not a payroll code. Something someone created to look like both without being either." She folded her hands on the table. I'm thinking that takes a certain kind of knowledge. The kind of knowledge someone would have if they'd spent years working in land brokerage. You think Ritter is feeding money to Sutton. I think someone is feeding money somewhere, Clara said carefully. I don't want to name a conclusion I can't yet prove. William was quiet. What would you need to prove it? He said finally. The outer property records, and whatever original contracts exist for the land Sutton brokered on your behalf. She paused. Including the contract he arranged for our arrangement. William looked at her steadily. You think he was using the marriage arrangement as cover, he said. I think the timing is interesting, she said. Someone who had been skimming your accounts for potentially a year would want your attention elsewhere, particularly your accounting attention. She kept her voice level. A new wife is a significant distraction. The word hung in the air between them. She watched him work through the implications, watched his face move through something that was not quite anger. It was slower than anger, more considered. The response of a man who had already been betrayed once and had learned that the second time you felt it differently. Less hot, more cold. I should have been paying closer attention to my own books, he said. You were managing a cattle operation across thousands of acres, Clara said. You trusted the people you put in place to do their jobs. That's how people get taken advantage of. Yes, she said. It is. He looked at her across this table. Are you angry? She said. At me, for I know this isn't what you expected our first week to look like. William shook his head, slow and deliberate. I'm not angry at you, he said. I'm angry at myself for not being more careful, and He stopped, started again. I'm grateful. Grateful, she repeated, testing the word. You sat in that study for 4 days doing work that wasn't asked of you, work you had no obligation to do. His voice was very even. You found something that could have destroyed this ranch if it had kept going long enough, and you brought it to me straight, without softening it or making yourself smaller than it. He looked at the circled number on the paper. I'm grateful, Clara. It was the first time he had used her given name. She noticed it. She filed it away next to all the other things she was filing and leaving alone, and then she picked up the paper and stood. I'll start on the outer property records today, she said. All right, he said. She was halfway to the door when he spoke again. Clara. She turned. Be careful around Ritter, he said. Until we know what we're dealing with. Don't let him know what you found. She nodded. She went back to the study. And she did not tell William that Boyd Ritter had already come to the study door the previous evening when she'd thought she was alone and had stood there for a long moment watching her work before she'd heard his footstep and looked up. He had smiled and said he was just checking that she had everything she needed. She had smiled back and said she did. Neither of them had believed the other. Boyd Ritter was 43 years old, clean-shaven, and had the particular social fluency of a man who had spent decades making people feel comfortable while he looked for their weak points. Clara recognized the type because her father had done business with 2 or 3 men like him over the years. Men who remembered every name, laughed at every joke, and made every transaction feel like a favor. They were doing you personally. He came to find her in the garden that afternoon. Mrs. Hartwell, he said. He was the first person on the ranch to use the name, and he delivered it with a warmth that was not quite genuine and not quite false. It occupied a careful middle ground. How are you settling in? Very well, Clara said. She was turning soil for the beds she planned to put in, and she kept working as she spoke. You're Boyd Ritter. I am, he said, pleased that she knew. I've been with William 6 years now. I manage the outer properties, the grazing leases, the seasonal arrangements. He came a step closer. If there's anything you need to understand about how the ranch operates, I'm happy to help. It's a big operation for someone new to it. That's very kind, Clara said. I've been working through the accounts to get myself oriented. A brief pause, almost imperceptible. Of course, Ritter said. William's accounts are thorough, though they can look complicated on first pass. I'm happy to walk you through the organizational system if anything looks confusing. Clara turned another section of soil. Actually, she said, I think I've got the system figured out. It's quite logical once you understand the coding structure. She glanced up at him with a pleasant expression. Whoever designed it clearly had a background in ledger organization. Something moved in Ritter's eyes. It was gone before she could pin it down. I did help William organize the system early on, he said. So if you're seeing my logic in there, that makes sense. It does make sense, Clara agreed. Very internally consistent. A beat. Well, Ritter said, I'll let you get back to your garden. It'll be nice to have something growing out here again. He paused as if something had just occurred to him. You know, Miss Eleanor had quite a hand with the garden. William always said this part of the property was better when someone was tending it. Clara looked at him. He smiled back, pleasant and easy, and entirely deliberate. I look forward to seeing what you do with it, he said, and walked away. Clara watched him go. She pressed the back of the spade into the earth and stood for a moment, steady and still, processing what had just happened. Ritter had come to take the measure of her. He had walked away unsatisfied, and he had thrown Eleanor Brooks's name into the conversation with the precision of someone who had practiced the throw. She went back inside and wrote everything down. That evening, Mrs. Delaney told her about Eleanor Brooks without being asked. This happened because Clara helped with the dishes after dinner, a thing she had done every night and which had apparently surprised Mrs. Delaney so deeply on the first night that the older woman had simply stood and stared before recovering herself, and because Mrs. Delaney, when she was working with her hands, talked. Ritter mentioned Eleanor to you today, the older woman said. Clara handed her a bowl to dry. He did. Figured he would. Mrs. Delaney dried the bowl with the brisk competence she applied to everything. He and Eleanor have an understanding. Not a romantic one, she's too calculating for that, and so's he. A practical understanding. He was useful to her when she was here, and she was useful to him. Useful how? Eleanor's father owns the Double Creek property. It borders Hartwell land on two sides. Mrs. Delaney set the bowl on the shelf. There has been a disagreement for years about where exactly the property lines run. Nothing gone to court yet. But it's the kind of disagreement that could if the right people pushed it. Clara was quiet, turning this over. Eleanor wanted to marry William, Mrs. Delaney said plainly, in the tone of someone who had decided plain was the only reasonable register for this information. She's been wanting that for 4 years. Her father wants the line dispute settled. William owning Hartwell and the Double Creek property through marriage would settle it very cleanly for everyone. Except William didn't marry Eleanor. No, he didn't. A pause. She was in San Francisco supposedly for her health, and in that time Mrs. Delaney stopped. Selected her words. William decided he was done waiting for something that seemed to keep finding reasons not to happen. He wrote to Edgar Sutton. And Edgar Sutton found you. Clara handed her the last dish. And Eleanor, she said slowly, is coming back. Mrs. Delaney set the dish on the shelf and turned to face her directly. Eleanor Brooks came back to Red Willow 2 days ago, she said. I heard it from the postwriter this morning. The kitchen was very quiet. Why didn't William tell me? Clara said. Because he may not know yet. Mrs. Delaney studied her. Or he may be figuring out how to. Clara nodded. She untied her apron and folded it over the rack. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me, Mrs. Delaney said. Just don't make the mistake of thinking this is a small thing. I don't, Clara said. I'm not in the habit of making things smaller than they are. Mrs. Delaney looked at her for a moment, with an expression that was Clara thought as close to warmth as the woman's face naturally allowed. No, she said. I'm starting to see that. William told her the next morning. He came to the study door while she was working and stood in the frame with his arms crossed and his jaw set in the particular way she was beginning to recognize as his version of steeling himself. Eleanor Brooks is back in town, he said. I know, Clara said without looking up from the ledger. A pause. Mrs. Delaney, he said. Postwriter, Clara said. Via Mrs. Delaney. He came into the room and sat in the chair across the desk. He looked tired, not physically the way he looked after a long day with the cattle. Tired in the particular way of someone managing too many things that required careful handling simultaneously. I should have told you yesterday, he said. Yes, she said. I wasn't sure how to. She set the pencil down and looked at him directly. Can I ask you something honestly? You always ask things honestly, he said. I've noticed that. Do you still have feelings for her? The question sat between them direct and unsoftened, the way Clara had decided every important question needed to be. William met her eyes without flinching. I had feelings for who I thought she was, he said, which turned out to be a significant misunderstanding. A pause. 4 years ago, I was in love with a woman I had mostly constructed in my own head out of a combination of admiration and wishful thinking. I was in love with a version of Eleanor Brooks that didn't exist. And the real one is intelligent, determined, and would like to own this ranch. He said it without venom, just clarity. I'm not angry at her for that. Ambition is not a character flaw. But I spent 4 years confusing someone's interest in my land for something personal, and I'm done making that mistake. Clara looked back at her ledger. All right, she said. That's all you want to say about it. I believe you, she said simply. I'm not sure what more there is to say. William watched her for a moment with that unclassifiable expression she had been cataloging since the first day. Most people would want a longer conversation, he said. I'm not most people, Clara said. And I don't think you are either, which is why I'm going to tell you something I haven't told you yet. She told him about Ritter at the study door the previous evening. She told him about the garden conversation, the careful deployment of Eleanor's name, the way Ritter had read her reaction with the practiced attention of a man checking a trap. She told him about Mrs. Delaney's information regarding the Double Creek border dispute and Eleanor's father's stake in it. William listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he was very quiet for a long time. You think Ritter is reporting to Sutton, he said, and that Eleanor's return now at this specific moment is connected. I think the timing is interesting, Clara said for the second time in 2 days. That's all I can say with certainty. What do you need from me to build the proof? The original land contracts, all of them. Especially anything Sutton brokered in the last 2 years. She met his eyes. And I need you to keep Ritter occupied and away from this office. Something moved in William's expression. Not quite a smile. Something more complex, a recognition perhaps, of the specific, unexpected way things sometimes worked out. You've been here 9 days, he said. I'm aware, Clara said. You have done more useful work in 9 days than I managed in the last 8 months of worrying about things I couldn't see clearly. Clara felt heat on her face. She turned back to the ledger. I'm good at numbers, she said. Clara. She looked up. I'm not saying it because it's a kind thing to say, he said. I'm saying it because it's true, and you need to hear it said plainly. And I'm getting the impression that's not something that's happened often enough in your life. She did not know what to do with that. She chose, as she often did, to be honest about not knowing. I don't, she said quietly. Happen often enough, you're right. Then you'll hear it again, he said, and stood and went back to his work. Eleanor Brooks came to Hartwell Ranch on a Tuesday. She arrived without announcement, which told Clara everything she needed to know about how Eleanor understood the geography of the situation. She had walked through that door often enough that knocking felt like an unnecessary formality. Clara was in the hallway when the door opened, carrying the outer property ledger she'd retrieved from the filing cabinet William had opened for her that morning. She and Eleanor saw each other at the exact same moment. Eleanor Brooks was 30 years old, and she was genuinely beautiful in the way that some women were the kind that did not require effort or circumstance, that simply existed as a fact about them. Dark hair, clear skin, a bearing that communicated comfort with being looked at. She looked at Clara, the way Clara had been looked at her entire life, the rapid inventory of a person deciding what category to file her in, followed by the subtle repositioning that told you what category had been chosen. You must be William's wife, Eleanor said. Clara Whitfield, Clara said. She did not offer the married name because they were not as yet formally married. The arrangement had been made, but the ceremony was scheduled for the following month, a fact she was now wondering whether Eleanor knew. Mr. Hartwell is in the northern pasture. I can send for him if you'd like to wait. I'll wait, Eleanor said, and moved past her into the sitting room with the easy authority of someone who knew where the chairs were. Clara set the ledger on the hall table and followed her in. They sat across from each other. Eleanor looked around the room with the particular attention of someone cataloging changes. "You've rearranged things," she said. "A little," Clara said. "For better flow." Eleanor brought her gaze back to Clara's face. She did not look at the scar, which was almost more unsettling than if she had. "I heard you've been spending a good deal of time in the study, going through the accounts." News traveled fast in a ranch. Particularly, Clara noted when someone on the ranch was carrying it. "I have," Clara said pleasantly. "That's unusual," Eleanor said. "Most women in your position would be getting to know the house, the staff, the social arrangements." A light pause. "The accounts are a fairly specific interest for someone new." "I've always found numbers interesting," Clara said. "Since I helped my father manage his books. I suppose it's a habit." Eleanor smiled. It was a practiced smile full of warmth that stopped precisely at her eyes. "How thoughtful," she said. "William is lucky to have someone so practical." The word was selected with the precision of a blade chosen for a specific cut. Clara smiled back. "Hi is," she agreed cheerfully. "And I'm lucky to have someone who actually talks to me instead of managing around me. Some women in my position spend their whole marriage not knowing what's in the accounts." She tilted her head slightly. "That always struck me as a dangerous situation. Don't you think?" Something moved in Eleanor's eyes. Before she could respond, William's step came down the hall. He came into the room and stopped in the doorway, reading the situation with the quick assessment of a man used to walking into uncertain terrain. "Eleanor," he said. "William." She rose and her warmth shifted registers warmer, now more personal, the performance calibrated for him. "You look well. Montana agrees with you." "It always has," he said. He came to stand beside Clara's chair, not dramatically, not possessively, simply naturally the way people stood beside people they were thinking about. "What brings you out?" "I'm back in town," Eleanor said, as if this answered the question completely. "I wanted to pay my respects. Meet your—" She gestured slightly toward Clara. "I've heard so much." "Have you?" William said. His voice was even and gave nothing. "Red Willow talks," Eleanor said with a small laugh that invited him to find this charming. He didn't take the invitation. "We're glad you're recovered," he said. "Clara and I are a bit buried in work today. Can I have Danny drive you back to town?" The smile stayed on Eleanor's face, but the warmth drained from it with the speed of something reaching its structural limit. "Of course," she said. "I'll leave you to it." She gathered herself and moved toward the hall. At the doorway she paused and looked back, and her eyes found Clara's with an expression that had set down all its pretenses. "It was lovely to meet you, Mrs. Hartwell," she said. "And you?" Clara said. Eleanor left. The front door closed. William looked at Clara. "How long was she here?" he said. 10 minutes before you arrived," Clara said. "She knows I've been in the accounts." "Ritter," William said. "Almost certainly." Clara picked up the outer property ledger from the hall table where she'd set it. "William, I need to show you something I found this morning." She showed him the deed. It was tucked between 2 pages of the outer property records, not hidden exactly, but inserted in a place where it would not be found unless someone was reading every page carefully. It was a survey document dated 14 months ago describing the boundary line between Hartwell Ranch and the Double Creek property. It was not the survey William had signed. The margins were different, small but measurable. The kind of difference that would not be visible to the naked eye on a casual reading, but that would hold up in a court of law as the legal definition of where one property ended and another began. If this document was filed, Hartwell Ranch would lose approximately 600 acres of its northern range. William looked at it for a very long time. Then he looked at Clara. "This was in my own files," he said. "Yes," she said. "Filed between the March grazing lease and the April water rights renewal. Exactly where no one would look unless they were reading everything." "How long has it been there?" 14 months, she said. "Going by the date." though I'd want a lawyer to verify that the date itself hasn't been adjusted. William set the document on the desk very carefully. Sutton brokered my water rights renewal, he said. I know, Clara said. And Boyd Ritter witnessed the filing. I know that too, she said. The weight of what she was saying filled the room. They're going to use Eleanor, William said slowly. Her father files a claim based on this survey. The boundary dispute goes to court. If this document has been properly recorded somewhere, the court may recognize it. And the property line moves, Clara said. 600 acres, including the Northern Creek access. The ranch loses 40% of its summer grazing capacity without that access. Yes, Clara said. William stood very still. Then he did something Clara had not expected. He turned toward the window, not dramatically, just turning a man needing a moment to put his back to something while he organized himself, and she saw his shoulders settle, and she saw him take one deliberate breath, and then he turned back. What do we do? He said. Not what should I do? Not I'll handle it. We. Clara had been waiting for someone to say that word with that meaning her entire life, and had not known it until this moment. She looked at the document on the desk. We find the original survey, she said. The one you actually signed. And we find whoever recorded this one, and we build a record of every transaction that connects back to it. She looked up at him. And we do it before Eleanor's father files anything. How long? Days, she said. Maybe a week. Can you do it? She thought about all the years of being told to make herself smaller. All the years of preemptive apology. All the years of finding the comparison that diminished her before someone else could. She thought about William's voice saying, I'm not most people and neither are you. Yes, she said. I can do it. And she meant it, the way she had never meant anything. Not from certainty about the outcome, but from certainty about herself. About what she was made of. About what she had always been made of, even in all the years before anyone had bothered to see it. She sat back down at the desk. She opened the ledger. She got to work. Outside somewhere down the road toward Red Willow. Eleanor Brooks was riding back to town with an expression on her face that had nothing to do with the pleasant visit she would describe to her father when she arrived. And Boyd Ritter, who had watched the ranch house from the fence line long enough to see the visiting wagon depart, turned back toward the outbuildings with the careful walk of a man deciding whether to wait or to move. He had not yet decided when the study lamp burned on into the evening steady and bright, casting its light across a woman who was only just beginning to understand how much she was worth. Clara found the original survey on a Thursday morning tucked inside the back cover of a property registration ledger from 3 years prior, the kind of place where documents went when someone wanted them inaccessible without making them technically missing. She stared at it for a full minute before she touched it. Then she set down her coffee cup, pulled on a pair of cotton gloves she had requisitioned from Mrs. Delaney's sewing basket the previous day, and carefully lifted the document into the light. It was the survey William had signed. His signature was at the bottom, clean and deliberate, the way all his signatures were. The boundary lines were drawn in the original surveyor's hand, and the measurements were different from the fraudulent document by exactly the margin that mattered, small enough to look like clerical variance to a casual reader, large enough to represent 600 acres of northern range to anyone who knew what they were looking at. She set both documents side by side. She wrote down every difference. Then she walked to the barn and found William before he had finished his morning coffee and said very quietly, so the ranch hands nearby could not hear, I have both surveys. I need you to come to the study. He came immediately. He looked at both documents for a long time. He looked at Clara's notes. He looked at the signature on the fraudulent survey. Not his signature. She had established that the previous evening by laying 3 confirmed examples of his handwriting against it and finding the pen pressure subtly wrong. Someone had practiced it. Not perfectly. It's not my signature, he said. No, she said. It's close, but no. Who besides Sutton would have enough access to my paperwork to practice my signature? Someone who had been in this study regularly, Clara said. Someone with reason to handle documents with your name on them. They both arrived at the same answer at the same moment. Ritter has been in this study every week for 6 years, William said. I know, Clara said. He set the documents down on the desk. He pressed both hands flat against the surface and stood very still, and Clara watched him work through the specific anger of a man who had trusted someone for 6 years and was now reconstructing all of that time with different information. It was not a quick process. She did not rush it. "What do we do with this?" he said when he was done. "We take it to a lawyer," she said. "Not in Red Willow. Someone in Helena. Someone who has no existing relationship with Sutton or anyone connected to him. That's a 2-day ride. I know. I can't leave the ranch right now, not with Ritter still here." "I'm aware," Clara said. "I wasn't suggesting you go." He looked at her. "I'll go," she said. "Give me a letter of authorization and the documents. I'll take the Wednesday stage." "Clara, I've handled accounts, contracts, and difficult men my entire adult life," she said. "I can handle a lawyer in Helena." "It's not the lawyer I'm worried about." "Then what?" He looked at her steadily. "If Ritter figures out what you've found, and he may already suspect, then I'd better leave before he figures out how much I've found," she said, which is another argument for the Wednesday stage. William stared at her for a long moment. She held his gaze without flinching, and she saw the moment he stopped arguing with the logic of it and simply accepted it the way a practical man accepted weather. "I'll have the letter ready tonight," he said. "Good," she said. "Now go back outside and act like this conversation was about the garden." His mouth moved not quite a smile, but something adjacent to it. "You're going to be all right, Clara Whitfield," he said. "I've always been all right," she said. "I just didn't always know it." Ritter came to her that afternoon. She had expected him the previous day, and then that morning, so she had been waiting with the particular calm of someone who has done their worrying ahead of time and arrived on the other side of it. He knocked on the study door, which he had never done before, and she understood from the knocking that the calculation had changed. He was being careful now in a way he had not needed to be when she was simply William's inconvenient new wife who might wander into the accounts. "Do you have a minute?" he said. "Of course," she said. He sat in the chair across the desk. He looked at the surface of the desk, which held nothing but the household account ledger and her personal notebook. She had moved everything sensitive that morning. "I've been thinking about our conversation in the garden," he said. "I wanted to apologize if I seemed unwelcoming. I know it can be difficult coming into an established operation and trying to find your footing." "It hasn't been difficult," Clara said pleasantly. "Everyone has been very kind." "Good," he smiled. "I also wanted to offer if you're finding any of the account structures confusing. I'm happy to walk you through the history of how they were set up. Some of the organizational choices go back years. They can look unusual to fresh eyes." "They can," Clara agreed. "Though I find fresh eyes sometimes see things more clearly than eyes that have been looking at something for a long time." The smile stayed on his face. His eyes went somewhere more careful. "What kinds of things?" he said lightly. "Oh, patterns mostly," she said. "The way entries repeat. The way coding structures tend to reflect whoever built them. You can learn a great deal about a bookkeeper by reading their ledger carefully." She tilted her head. "You built a very logical system, Mr. Ritter. I can see your thinking in it." A beat. "I'm glad it's been useful," he said. "Extremely," she said. He stood. He straightened his vest. He smiled one more time with the particular smile of a man who was rearranging his next several steps. "Well," he said, "if you need anything." "I'll know where to find you," she said. He left. Clara waited until she heard his footsteps reach the end of the hall before she let out the breath she had been holding. Then she picked up her pen and wrote a note and sent it with Danny Alcott to William in the North Pasture. The note said, "He came. Move faster." Mittag. The news from town arrived the next morning, and it arrived badly. Danny Alcott came back from the supply run with the regular provisions and an expression on his face that said he was carrying something he did not want to deliver. He found William first, and then William found Clara, and they stood in the kitchen with Mrs. Delaney present because she was going to find out anyway, and it was better to have her in the room. "Hiram Brooks filed a border claim yesterday afternoon," William said. "At the county recorder's office. He filed the survey." Clara's hands went still on the table. The fraudulent one, she said. Yes. He filed it before we could get to Helena. Apparently Ritter sent a rider the same night William stopped. He must have signaled them the moment you found the second survey. The kitchen was very quiet. What does that mean legally? Clara said. If it's been officially filed. It means the claim exists on the record, William said. It means we need a lawyer faster than Wednesday. Can you get someone from Helena here sooner? I've already sent a telegram. Mrs. Delaney set down her dishcloth. How long before Brooks can force anything through the courts? With a favorable Judge Weeks, William said. With an unfavorable one. He paused. There's a territorial circuit judge coming through Red Willow in 11 days. Then we have 11 days, Clara said, to prove that the survey is fraudulent, that our signature was forged, and that the filing was part of a coordinated scheme to defraud the ranch. William's voice was steady. The steadiness cost him something. She could hear it in the way he was managing each word. In 11 days. Clara looked at her notes spread across the kitchen table. 6 days of meticulous documentation, transaction codes, dated entries, cross-referenced payments. The two surveys side by side with her written analysis of every discrepancy. It's enough to start with, she said. It's not enough to win with, William said. Not yet, she agreed. But it tells us where to look for the rest. She looked at him directly. The payments in the ledger, the ones coded with the initials. They have to end somewhere. Money doesn't disappear. It lands somewhere specific in a specific account under a specific name. Sutton's brokerage, William said. If we can prove that those payments went into Sutton's accounts, we can connect the financial fraud to the land fraud. She spread her notes flat. They built this together. The skimming supported the scheme, maybe funded the false survey, paid whoever drafted it, covered the filing fees. It's one operation, not two. And one operation leaves a single trail. William looked at her notes. You mapped this from the ledgers, he said. Most of it. There are gaps. We need the brokerage records from Sutton's office, which we cannot legally access without a court order, William said. Or a cooperative witness, Clara said. Mrs. Delaney made a sound. Both of them looked at her. Ritter keeps copies of everything in the bunkhouse, Mrs. Delaney said with the calm of someone disclosing information she had been holding until the appropriate moment. Has since his first year here. I always thought it was odd. Men who are managing their own business honestly don't usually keep duplicates of their employer's records at home. Silence. You knew, William said. I suspected, Mrs. Delaney said. I didn't know what it meant until now. If Ritter has copies, Clara said carefully, and if those copies include the brokerage correspondence, he won't give them willingly, William said. No, Clara agreed. But men who keep copies of things keep them because they want insurance, and men who want insurance usually want it in case their partners turn on them. She paused. Ritter is not the architect of this. He's the instrument. And instruments, when they realize they're going to take the fall alone, often become very interested in talking. The kitchen settled into a specific kind of quiet. The quiet of people looking at a chessboard and seeing 3 moves ahead for the first time. You want to give him a reason to think Sutton will sacrifice him, William said slowly. I want to give him the truth, Clara said. Because the truth is, Sutton will sacrifice him. The moment this gets legal, Ritter is the one with his name on the witness filings and the account entries. Sutton will say, Ritter acted independently. How do we make Ritter see that? Clara thought for a moment. You talk to him, she said. Not me. He's been underestimating me since I arrived, and I've been letting him. But he respects you, or at least he respects what you represent. You go to him alone, and you tell him exactly what's been filed, and exactly what it means for the person whose signature is on the county records. And that person is Ritter, William said. Ritter's name is on 3 of the irregular payment entries as authorizing signature, Clara said. I found it on day 2. I didn't mention it because I wanted to understand the full scope first. William looked at her. You've known his name was on those entries for a week. Yes. And you didn't tell me. I needed to know how far up it went before I told you anything that might make you act before we had the full picture. She held his gaze. I was right to wait. Howe was quiet for a long moment. Yes, he said finally. You were. Talk to him today, she said, before he has time to destroy those copies. William nodded. He stood. He put his hat on with the deliberateness of a man going to do something unpleasant and necessary. He looked at Clara one more time before he left. When this is over, he said, I am going to say a great many things that I have been finding inadequate words for. She felt warmth rise to her face. When this is over, she said, I'll be ready to hear them. He left. Mrs. Delaney turned back to the dishes with the careful neutrality of a woman who had just witnessed something private and was treating it accordingly. Clara picked up her pen. She had 11 days. She got back to work. The conversation with Ritter lasted 45 minutes. Clara did not hear it directly. She heard it in fragments through the distance between the study and the bunkhouse. Not words, but tone, the rising and falling of voices, one of which stayed level throughout and one of which did not. She heard the moment the conversation shifted a particular silence, followed by a different register of voice, entirely lower and faster, and stripped of its social confidence. She heard Ritter's footsteps crossing the yard an hour later, coming toward the house. She did not look up from her notes. He knocked on the study door. She looked up then. He looked like a man who had spent the last hour discovering that the structure he'd been standing on was not as solid. The practiced ease was gone. What was left underneath it was younger and considerably more frightened. Mrs. Hartwell, he said. She let the name stand. He said you found this payment entries, Ritter said. 3 weeks ago, she said. Something moved across his face. She thought it might be the particular pain of recognizing that the timeline he had been working with was wrong, that he had been behind from the moment Clara Whitfield sat down at the study desk and had not known it. I didn't know about the survey, he said. The land fraud that was Sutton. He told me the payments were a consulting arrangement, a retainer. For what service? He said it was market research, land valuation data, information about the ranch's operational patterns. He stopped. I knew it was irregular. I told myself it was close enough to legitimate. That's what people tell themselves, Clara said without particular judgment. Right up until it isn't. I have a family, he said. It came out rough. I made a bad decision 6 years ago, and I've been too far in to get out since. Tell that to the lawyer, Clara said. Not to me. His jaw tightened. Will Hartwell press charges? That depends on what you give us, she said. The copies in the bunkhouse, everything you have, every piece of correspondence between you and Sutton, every instruction, every record of what you were paid, and where it came from. He was quiet. Sutton will say I did this myself, Ritter said. He'll say I created a scheme and blamed him. Probably, Clara said. But you have documentation and he doesn't know that yet. And we have the forgery. The signature on the fraudulent survey is not William's. A handwriting expert will confirm that in an afternoon. She paused. The question is whether your name ends up at the bottom of this or whether Edgar Sutton's does. The silence stretched. All right, Ritter said. All right what? She said, because she needed him to say it plainly. All right, I'll give you the copies. He exhaled. Everything. He brought them within the hour, a leather satchel worn at the handles that he set on the study desk, with the particular relief of a man putting down something heavy he had been carrying for too long. Clara went through it methodically, piece by piece, with Ritter sitting across from her and William standing at the door. It was more than she had hoped for. Sutton had been meticulous, which was a professional habit that had now become his greatest liability. There were letters detailing the payment structure. There were coded instructions for the ledger entries. There was a draft of the fraudulent survey, with corrections in a handwriting Clara could now identify from 6 weeks of reading Sutton's correspondence. There was a letter discussing the timing of Eleanor Brooks's return to Red Willow, phrased in terms that made it clear her return had been coordinated, that she and her father were participants in the scheme, not its originators, but participants nonetheless. And at the bottom of the satchel folded small a contract. Not a land contract. A financial contract between Edgar Sutton and Hiram Brooks, establishing what Brooks would receive if the border claim succeeded, and what Sutton would receive as the broker of the resulting transaction, when William Hartwell was forced to sell distressed acreage at below market value to cover his legal costs. They had not planned to take the ranch outright. They had planned to bleed it. Clara set the contract on the desk. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at William. I was reading it over her shoulder. She could tell by the quality of his stillness, the specific stillness of a man who has just understood the complete shape of the trap he nearly walked into. "It's enough," she said quietly. "It's more than enough," William said. "We send for the lawyer tonight." "Yes. And we send a copy of the contract to the Territorial Marshal's office," she said. "Separate from the lawyer, so that if anything happens to the originals, we have a record." William looked at her. "You thought of that before I did," he said. "I've been thinking about it since Tuesday," she said. "I wanted the contract in hand before I said anything, because a plan without evidence is just a worry." He shook his head. Not in disagreement. In something that looked from her angle like a man watching someone exceed every expectation he had managed to restrain himself from having. "Ritter," William said without looking away from Clara. "You'll write a full statement. Everything from the beginning." Ritter nodded. He looked wrung out and diminished, and underneath it, faintly relieved. Clara recognized the specific exhaustion of someone who had been carrying a lie long enough that putting it down felt like rest, even when the consequences were still coming. "I'll start tonight," Ritter said. He left the room. William and Clara were alone in the study. The lamp was burning. Outside the ranch, sounds moved in their usual patterns. Horses, cattle in the far distance. The creak of a structure settling into evening. Ordinary sounds. The sounds of a thing that had very nearly been destroyed by patient and methodical greed and had not been. Because a woman with a travel bag and a history of being underestimated had sat down at a desk and read every page. William picked up the contract. He held it for a moment. Then he set it back down and looked at Clara with an expression she had never seen on his face before, and could not immediately name something beyond gratitude, beyond admiration. Something that had been building quietly in the background of all of their conversations, and their careful words, and their working beside each other evenings, and that was now simply plainly present. "I need to say something," he said. "All right," she said. "When you stepped off that stage 3 weeks ago," he said, "I didn't know what to think. I knew I wanted to give you a fair chance. I knew I had made up my mind before you arrived based on half a page you wrote without realizing you were writing it." He paused. "What I didn't know, what I had no way of knowing, was what kind of person you were going to turn out to be." Clara held very still. "You are the most capable person I have ever known," he said. "Not in spite of everything you've been told about yourself. Not as a surprise given where you came from. Just straightforwardly as a fact. You are the most capable person I have ever known, and I don't want you to go one more day without knowing that I see it." She felt something behind her eyes that she was not going to give into because she was sitting at a desk with important documents under her hands, and this was not the moment. "William," she said. "You don't have to respond," he said. "I didn't say it to make you respond. I said it because it needed to be said." She looked at the documents on the desk. She looked at him. "I hear you," she said quietly. I'm hearing you." He nodded. He picked up his hat from the corner of the desk where he'd set it. "I'll send the telegram to Helena tonight," he said, "and to the marshal." "Good," she said. He moved toward the door. "William." He stopped. She had not planned to say anything else. But she found in the moment that she had something to say, and that the night felt too long to leave it unsaid. "I have spent my entire life," she said carefully, "believing that the things I was good at did not count because they were the wrong kinds of things. The wrong face, the wrong kind of worth, the wrong category of good." She paused. "This is the first time I have done something that mattered, and had someone see it, and not wondered immediately what was wrong with the seeing." She looked at the lamp rather than at him. "That means something. I wanted you to know it means something." The room was very quiet. "It's going to keep meaning something," William said softly, "for as long as I have anything to say about it." He left. Clara sat at the desk for a long moment in the lamplight alone in the room that had been the center of a fraud, and was now the center of its unraveling, and felt something she had not felt in so long she almost did not recognize it. She felt like herself, not the diminished version, not the preemptive version that apologized for existing before anyone could comment on it. The actual complete version, the one that had been there all along, reading numbers and seeing patterns and carrying more than her share, and waiting without quite knowing it for a situation that needed exactly who she was. She pulled the ledger toward her. She still had work to do, but for the first time in 25 years, she did it without the weight. Tatag. Eleanor Brooks came to the ranch one more time. She came on a Sunday 4 days before the circuit judge was due in Red Willow, and she came without her father, and without the social pretense that had colored her first visit. She came early while the light was still thin, and she asked to speak to Clara alone. Clara received her in the front room. Eleanor sat. She looked different from the first visit, not diminished exactly, but recalibrated, as if the news that the legal claim might be contested had rearranged her internally. "You know what my father filed," Eleanor said. "Yes," Clara said. "I want you to understand that I didn't know about the survey," Eleanor said. "The fraudulent one. I didn't know it wasn't real." Clara looked at her steadily. "But you knew about the scheme." "I knew my father and Sutton had an arrangement," Eleanor said. "I thought it was—" She stopped. "I told myself it was a business strategy. Border disputes happen. Property lines are contested all the time." "A forged signature is not a property line dispute," Clara said. Eleanor looked at her hands. "No," she said. "It isn't." There was a silence that was Clara thought more honest than anything Eleanor had produced during her first visit. "Why are you here?" Clara said. "Because I want you to know that when this goes before the judge, I intend to tell the truth about what I knew and when I knew it." Eleanor looked up. "My father is going to be very angry. It will not be comfortable. But the alternative is standing in a courtroom and lying under oath, and I find that I cannot." She paused. "Whatever else I am, I'm not that." Clara studied her. She thought about the woman who had walked through the front door and around her like she wasn't there. She thought about the word practical delivered like a blade. She thought about 4 years of Eleanor believing she would eventually become the mistress of Hartwell Ranch. She thought about what it cost probably to sit in this chair and say what she had just said. "I'll tell the lawyer you may be a cooperative witness," Clara said. "That's all I can offer you." "That's all I'm asking," Eleanor said. She stood. She looked at Clara for a moment with an expression that was entirely unguarded, stripped of the social performance that had defined both their previous interactions. "He chose right," Eleanor said. It cost her something. Clara could see it cost her something. "I know," Clara said gently. Eleanor left. Clara sat for a moment in the quiet of the room. Then she went to find William, because there was an important update for the lawyer's brief, and because she had learned in the last 3 weeks that the most effective thing she could do when something felt large and complicated was to pick up her pen and write it down. There were 4 days until the circuit judge arrived. They were going to need every hour. The lawyer's name was James Alderton, and he arrived from Helena on the Monday stage with a leather case under his arm, and the particular focused energy of a man who had reviewed the telegram summary 3 times on the journey and arrived with questions already organized. He sat at the study desk, Clara's desk, as she had begun thinking of it, and went through the documentation piece by piece. He did not comment as he read. He turned pages. He held the 2 surveys side by side. He read Ritter's written statement, which ran to 11 pages, and which Ritter had delivered with the hollow precision of a man emptying a wound. He read Sutton's letters. He read the contract between Sutton and Hiram Brooks. When he finished, he closed the folder and looked at William. "This is a strong case," he said. "Strong enough," William said. "Strong enough to contest the filing. Strong enough to request an emergency injunction preventing any enforcement of the border claim until the authenticity of the survey is determined." Alderton paused. "Whether it's strong enough for the circuit judge depends on the judge." "Who is it?" Clara said. Alderton looked at her. He had been looking at her with increasing attention throughout the morning. Not the appraising kind. The professional kind. The look of a man recalibrating his understanding of who in the room was going to be useful. "Judge Everett Colum," he said, "out of the Helena district." William and Clara exchanged a look. "Is that good or bad?" she said. "Colum is thorough," Alderton said. "He doesn't like having his time wasted, and he doesn't like fraud. If the evidence supports the argument, he'll follow it." A pause. "He also doesn't like procedural irregularities. The fact that this survey was filed without notifying the affected property owner is itself irregular." "Sutton filed it as an amendment to an existing easement record," Clara said, "which technically didn't require notification. I found the statute this morning." Alderton looked at her. "How did you find the relevant statute?" he said. "I wrote to the Territorial Land Office 2 weeks ago, requesting the complete filing procedures for boundary amendments," Clara said. "I wanted to understand the legal mechanism before we were in front of a judge." Alderton was quiet for a moment. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said, "if you ever decide ranching isn't your calling, you should consider the law." "I'll keep that in mind," she said. "In the meantime, can we use the irregular filing mechanism against them?" "It's an argument," Alderton said. "Not a winning argument on its own, but it adds to the picture of a deliberate scheme. They used a narrow legal pathway specifically to avoid triggering notification. That's not an accident. That's planning." "Add it to the brief," William said. "Already intending to," Alderton said. He stayed at the ranch for 2 days, working from the study with Clara. Beside him, she knew where everything was. She had the cross-references memorized, and on 3 separate occasions, she produced a document he asked for before he had finished asking for it. By the second evening, Alderton had stopped explaining his reasoning to her and started consulting her instead, which she understood was the highest professional compliment available to a woman in her position. On the second night after Alderton had retired, William found her still at the desk. "Go to sleep," he said. "In a minute," she said. "You've been at this since 5 this morning." "I know." She did not look up. "There's a payment record I can't reconcile. It's probably nothing. But probably nothing is different from definitively nothing, and I want to know which one it is before we walk into that courtroom." He pulled up a chair and sat beside her. Not across from her. Beside her. She registered the distinction. "Show me," he said. "You don't know accounts." "No, but I know the ranch operations. If a payment doesn't reconcile, it might be something I recognize from the operational side." She turned the ledger toward him and pointed. He looked at the entry. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "That's a payment to the Red Willow Water Authority." "There's no corresponding service record," Clara said. "There wouldn't be," William said slowly. That's for the Southern Creek Diversion Study. I ordered that study 18 months ago, to assess whether we could redirect the creek flow to improve summer grazing in the South Pasture." He paused. "Sutton brokered the contract with the Water Authority." Clara went very still. "Was the study ever completed?" she said. "No. The Water Authority said there were permitting delays. I stopped following up when things got busy." He looked at her. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that if Sutton brokered a contract with the Water Authority and those funds were paid, but the study was never performed, that's a second fraud." She turned the ledger page forward. "And if the Water Authority has no record of receiving those funds, then the money went somewhere else," William finished. "Alderton," she said. "In the morning," William said. "Now," she said. "This changes the scope of the charges." He looked at her for a long moment. She could see him weighing rest against the urgency she was radiating, and she could see the moment he recognized that she was right. "I'll get him," William said. Alderton came downstairs in his shirt sleeves with his reading glasses already on, which told Clara he had not been sleeping either. He read the entry. He read Clara's notes on the payment trail. He asked 4 precise questions, which she answered from memory. He sat back. "If the Water Authority confirms they never received those funds," he said, "we're looking at mail fraud in addition to the land scheme." He looked at Clara. "Do you have a contact at the Water Authority?" "I wrote to them this morning," she said. Both men stared at her. "I didn't know this specific payment was implicated," she said. But I wrote to every authority Sutton had brokered contracts with in the last 2 years, asking for confirmation of services received. She spread the ledger open. I have 3 other payments I couldn't reconcile. I wanted to know if any of them had the same problem. Alderton looked at William. Where did you find her? He said. Laramie, William said. His voice had something in it that was not quite humor and not quite wonder, and was somewhere between the two. You should keep her, Alderton said. I intend to, William said. Clara picked up her pen. Gentlemen, she said, we have a brief to finish. The hearing was set for Thursday at 10 in the morning in the Red Willow Territorial Courthouse, which was a 2-story building at the center of town that served on ordinary days as both the court and the post office, and which would, on this particular Thursday, be the most attended building in the county. Word had traveled. Word always traveled in small towns, and in Red Willow, it traveled with the particular speed of a story that had everything. Wealth fraud, a beautiful woman from a wealthy family, a new wife. Nobody had expected a land scheme that had been building for over a year. By Wednesday evening, there was not a person within 20 miles who did not know something about the hearing, and most of them knew more than they were supposed to. Clara did not sleep Wednesday night. She lay in the room that had become hers over the past month, listening to the ranch settle around her, and tried to organize her thoughts into something manageable. There was too much to organize. Every time she reached for one thread, 3 others pulled at her attention. The Water Authority response that had arrived by telegram that afternoon, confirming that 2 of the 3 unreconciled payments had no corresponding service records. Ritter's statement, which Alderton had reviewed and found credible. Eleanor Brooks, who had met with Alderton privately that afternoon, and whose testimony Alderton had said afterward with careful neutrality, was going to be significant. She was still awake when the light under the door shifted, and she heard a quiet knock. Clara? William's voice low. She sat up. I'm awake. He opened the door. He stood in the frame with his arms crossed and his expression doing the thing it did when he was concerned, and was working out how to say so without being heavy-handed about it. Go to sleep, he said. You're awake too, she said. I'm not the one who's been carrying this for a month. Neither of us has been sleeping. He came in and sat in the chair beside the window, which she had moved from its original position the first week because the original position caught the draft. Are you afraid? He asked. She thought about it honestly. Not of the hearing, she said. Not of Alderton, or the evidence, or the judge. She paused. I'm afraid of what happens in town. People have already made up their minds about some of this. They've made up their minds about me. She looked at her hands on the blanket. Whatever happens in that courtroom, I have to walk out of it and back into Red Willow. And people who decided I wasn't enough when I stepped off the stage are going to have opinions about everything I've done since. William was quiet for a moment. Let me tell you something about Red Willow, he said. The people who matter in this town are the ones who've been watching you work for a month. Danny Alcott has told the story of you finding the feed calculation error to approximately every person on this ranch. Mrs. Delaney told the women at the Tuesday social that you were the sharpest mind she'd encountered in 30 years of keeping house for difficult men, which from Margaret Delaney is roughly equivalent to a presidential commendation. He paused. The people whose opinions you're afraid of are the same people who were always going to have opinions. They don't count. They feel like they count, Clara said. I know, he said. They always feel like they count. That's how they stay loud. He leaned forward slightly. But feeling like they count and actually mattering are different things, and you know the difference. You've always known the difference. You just spent 25 years letting the loud thing drown out the true thing. She looked at him across the room. You're better at this than you let on, she said. At what? At saying the right thing. I had a lot of practice saying the wrong thing, he said. Silence mostly. I thought not saying things was the same as being careful. Turns out it's mostly just being absent. He met her eyes. I'm done being absent. The room was very quiet. Clara felt the thing she had been filing away and leaving alone stir in her chest, all of it at once. The first day, and the accounts, and the surveys, and his voice saying both, and the lamp burning, and him sitting beside her at the desk instead of across from it. "William," she said. "You should sleep," he said gently. "I know," she said. "I will." A pause. "Thank you. For all of it. For not sending me back." He stood. "Best decision I ever made," he said simply. I went back to the door. "William." He stopped. "When this is over," she said, "I'd like to have a real wedding." The statement surprised her as she said it. She had not planned it, had not known she was going to say it until it was already in the room. But she found that having said it, it was exactly accurate. He turned back. His expression was doing something she had not seen before, something unguarded and warm and slightly undone. "When this is over," he said, "we will have whatever kind of wedding you want." He left. Clara lay back down. She was asleep within 10 minutes. The courtroom filled early. Clara sat at the plaintiff's table beside Alderton and watched the room without appearing to watch it. She had dressed carefully, not to impress, not to perform, but because she had learned that presenting herself well in difficult rooms was a form of preparation. The same way organizing the documents the night before was preparation. She had pinned her hair simply. She wore her best dress, which was dark blue and well made, if not fashionable. She had not covered the scar. She had thought about covering it. She had stood at the mirror that morning and thought about it with the old familiar calculus, what people would see, what they would think. And then she had set down the powder and put on her hat and walked out. She was done with the calculus. Edgar Sutton sat across the room at the defendant's table with a lawyer Clara had not seen before, a man from Billings, who had the studied comfort of someone accustomed to making problems disappear through procedure rather than merit. Sutton himself was precisely what she had expected from his correspondence, a well-dressed man of about 50, with the particular settled confidence of someone who had been managing situations like this for years and expected to manage this one too. He had not looked at Clara when he entered the room. She noticed. Hiram Brooks sat in the gallery with his lawyer, a distinct and careful distance from Sutton's table. Eleanor was not present. Alderton had told Clara that morning that Eleanor would not be in the courtroom, but would be available to testify by written statement if required. Boyd Ritter sat in the far corner of the gallery, with the expression of a man who was profoundly uncertain whether he was in the right place, and had nowhere else to go. Judge Collum entered at precisely 10 o'clock. He was in his 60s, compact and direct, with the no-ceremony efficiency of a man who had presided over hundreds of hearings and retained zero tolerance for the ones that wasted his time. He reviewed his papers and looked at both tables. "I have reviewed the filings," he said. "I understand the plaintiff contests the validity of a boundary survey filed 14 days ago by the Double Creek property under Hiram Brooks's name. I understand the defendant maintains the survey is accurate and properly filed." He looked up. "I also understand there is a secondary matter involving alleged financial irregularities connected to the same parties. We will address these in order." He set the papers down. "Mr. Alderton, you may begin." Alderton stood. "How was good?" Clara had watched him work for 3 days and had a professional respect for the clean efficiency of his argument. He did not embellish, did not reach for emotional effect, trusted the evidence to carry its own weight. He laid the case out piece by piece, the original survey, the fraudulent survey, the signature analysis, the connection between Sutton's brokerage and the account irregularities, Ritter's statement, establishing the payment structure, the Water Authority confirmation of undelivered services. When he presented the contract between Sutton and Brooks, the document that made explicit the financial arrangement underpinning the entire scheme. The courtroom made a sound. A collective involuntary intake. Clara heard it the way you hear the moment a thing becomes real to people who had been watching it as an abstraction. Sutton's lawyer objected to the contract's admission. Judge Collum overruled him in 4 words. When Alderton finished, Sutton's lawyer stood and gave an argument that was technically competent and substantively hollow. A series of procedural objections and alternative explanations that assumed the judge had not read the documents and did not understand what he was looking at. Clara watched Judge Collum's face as the lawyer spoke and recognized the specific quality of attention that meant the judge had already made up his mind and was waiting politely for the other side to finish. And then Sutton's lawyer made a mistake. He called Clara to testify. His intention, Clara understood immediately, was to establish her as an unreliable witness, a woman who had arrived with no legal training, no formal accounting education, no standing to interpret documents, motivated by personal interest in her husband's financial situation. He had a prepared line of questions designed to make her documentation look like amateur work, and her conclusions look like emotional speculation. He did not know who he was dealing with. She sat in the witness box with her hands folded and her posture completely still, and she answered every question he asked with the precise measured accuracy of someone who had been preparing for this conversation since the second week of her marriage. He asked about her accounting credentials. She walked him through the ledger analysis point by point in terms precise enough that Judge Cullum began taking notes. He asked about the signature comparison. She explained the methodology she had used and the 3 corroborating examples, and then, because Alderton had suggested it and she had agreed it was right, she offered to demonstrate the specific differences in pen pressure in real time if the judge found it useful. The judge found it useful. She demonstrated it. Sutton's lawyer sat down. He tried one more approach. He suggested that Clara had a personal motive for fabricating or misinterpreting the evidence that her arrival at Hartwell Ranch under a marriage arrangement made her investment in the outcome suspect. Clara looked at him steadily. "I found the first irregularity in the accounts on my 5th day at the ranch," she said. "I found the fraudulent survey on my 16th day. I presented every piece of evidence I found directly to my husband and to legal counsel. I did not interpret the evidence. I documented it. The interpretation is in the documents themselves." She paused. "I did not manufacture a fraud in order to frame the people who committed it. That is a logical impossibility." Judge Cullum looked over his reading glasses at Sutton's lawyer with an expression that communicated the hearing's remaining temperature clearly. The lawyer sat down. Sutton took the stand himself. Clara had not expected this, and she thought Alderton had not expected it either. She saw his stillness shift slightly, the small recalibration of a man adjusting his plan. Sutton spoke with the polish of someone who had been the most confident person in rooms for decades and who had not yet fully processed that this was not that kind of room. He offered an alternative account. Ritter had acted independently. The payment irregularities were Ritter's scheme, not his. The contract with Brooks was a legitimate business arrangement misrepresented by the plaintiff. Howe was good at it. Convincing in the way of men who have been convincing for a long time and have forgotten that conviction is not the same as truth. And then Alderton stood up for cross-examination. He asked one question. He asked Sutton to explain in his own words why a letter dated 8 months ago, a letter in Sutton's own handwriting addressed to Ritter, with instructions for the specific ledger coding structure used in the irregular payments, bore a date stamp from a post office in Billings that placed it 3 months before Sutton claimed he had any knowledge of the scheme. Sutton went completely still. The room went completely still. Clara had found that letter on day 18. She had not told Alderton about it until he arrived because she had known it was the most important single piece, and she had not wanted anyone to have reason to make it disappear. She had kept it in the lining of her travel bag, which she kept in the room she slept in with the door latched. Sutton's lawyer began objecting. Judge Cullum overruled him before he finished the sentence. "Mr. Sutton," the judge said, "please answer the question." Sutton looked at his lawyer. His lawyer looked at the table. Sutton looked at the courtroom. And then he looked at Clara. She held his gaze without expression. He said. He stopped. He started again. "I would like to consult with my attorney." "You're on the stand, Mr. Sutton," Judge Cullum said with a patience that was not particularly warm. The silence stretched for a very long count. "I decline to answer," Sutton said. The judge took a recess. He came back 40 minutes later. He spoke for 12 minutes. He used words like preponderance of evidence and fraudulent inducement and conspiracy to defraud and forged instrument. And at the end of the 12 minutes, the border claim filed by Hiram Brooks was voided. The fraudulent survey was ordered stricken from the record, and Edgar Sutton and Boyd Ritter were referred to the Territorial Marshal for investigation of fraud, forgery, and criminal conspiracy. He also noted in a precise and unremarked aside that the financial restitution claim filed as part of the suit appeared well documented and would be addressed in a separate civil proceeding, at which time he expected the plaintiff's accounting records, which he described as some of the clearest documentation he had encountered in a fraud case of this complexity, to be admitted in full. He banged the gavel. The room erupted. Clara sat completely still at the table. She heard the noise around her. Voices, movement, the gavel again. Alderton beside her saying something she could not immediately parse through the sound, and she did not move. She felt William's hand on her shoulder. She looked up at him. He was standing behind her, and his hand was on her shoulder, and his face held the particular expression of a man who had just watched something extraordinary happen, and was not yet sure he had the words for it. "You did it," he said, quietly enough that only she could hear. "We did it," she said. He shook his head. "Clara," he said, "I managed a ranch for 15 years. You did that in a month." She felt something break open in her chest, not painfully the other way. The way things broke open when they had been held shut too long and the pressure finally let go. She pressed her hand over his on her shoulder. "Let's go home," she said. And they did. 2 hours later, the town of Red Willow had reorganized itself around a new understanding. The man near the stage office, the one who had said send her back on the day Clara arrived, passed her on the main street as she and William walked toward the livery. He kept his eyes on the ground. He said nothing. He walked faster. Clara watched him go without feeling anything particular about it. Not triumph. Not bitterness. The specific neutrality of someone who has stopped needing a thing and found the want simply gone. Danny Alcott was waiting with the wagon. He had his hat in his hands, and his face was doing something young men's faces did when they wanted to express something and did not have the practiced vocabulary for it yet. "Ma'am," he said. "Danny," she said. "The boys back at the ranch," he said. We all thought—" He gave up on the sentence. "We're real glad you came," he said. Clara looked at him. "So am I," she said. She climbed into the wagon. William settled beside her and picked up the reins, and the horse moved forward, and they drove out of Red Willow, with the afternoon light coming in long and warm across everything. And Clara sat beside the man who had said, "You're all I need," on a platform 3 weeks ago to a woman who had not known how to believe him. She was beginning to know. She looked out at the road ahead, the familiar road. Now the road she knew by its rhythms and its distances. The road that led to a ranch that was safe and whole, and hers, and she let herself sit quietly in the fact of it. She had come here believing she was someone who filled practical roles. She had been right. She had been entirely right and entirely wrong at the same time, because what she had not understood, what 25 years of being measured and found wanting had obscured from her, was that the practical things she was built for were not small. They were the things everything else rested on. William glanced at her sideways, the way he did when he was thinking something he hadn't decided yet whether to say. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "William." He kept his eyes on the road. "I was just thinking," he said, "that you came off that stage 3 weeks ago and said there must be a mistake." "I remember," she said. "You were wrong," he said. She looked at him. He looked back at her briefly, and the expression on his face was every conversation, and every lamp-lit evening, and every hand on a shoulder, and every plainly said true thing gathered into one. "You were exactly right," he said. The horse moved steadily forward. The ranch road opened ahead of them, stretching toward the place that had been waiting without knowing it for someone like Clara Whitfield to come along and make it complete. The ranch was quiet when they got home, but it was the kind of quiet that meant people had been waiting. Danny had ridden ahead somehow. Clara never figured out exactly how, given that they had left town at the same time, and by the time the wagon came through the gate, every hand on the Hartwell property was standing in the yard. Not in a line, not formally, just standing the way people stood when they had somewhere they wanted to be, and that somewhere happened to be right here. Nobody said anything grand. Nobody made a speech. Old Pete Callahan, who had been working Hartwell cattle since before William inherited the property, and who had said approximately 40 words to Clara in the entire month she had been there, stepped forward and took the horse's bridle without being asked. He looked up at her with his weathered face doing something uncomfortable and unfamiliar, and said, "Good work, ma'am," in the tone of a man releasing something he had been holding for a while. Clara looked down at him. "Thank you, Pete," she said. He nodded and walked the horse toward the barn. The rest of the hands drifted back to their work in the particular way of men who had done what they came to do and did not need to stand around being witnessed doing it. Danny caught her eye as he passed and grinned with the uncomplicated joy of someone young enough that good things still surprised him, and Clara found herself smiling back before she had decided to. Mrs. Delaney was on the porch. She had her arms crossed and her expression arranged in its usual configuration of controlled severity, which Clara had learned over 4 weeks was the older woman's default setting for any emotion above mild interest. She looked at Clara coming up the porch steps and said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "I made a pie." "What kind?" Clara said. "Apple. It was the only fruit we had enough of." A pause. "It's a good pie." "I don't doubt it," Clara said. Mrs. Delaney looked at her for another moment. "Come inside," she said. "Both of you, before it gets cold." They ate pie at the kitchen table while the afternoon light moved across the floor, and Mrs. Delaney sat with them, which she had never done before, and asked Alderton's opinion of Judge Colum, which led to a 40-minute conversation about territorial law and court procedure that was the most relaxed Clara had felt in 3 weeks. At some point she realized she had stopped calculating, stopped adding up the room and deciding in advance how she fit into it. She was simply sitting at a table in a kitchen that was hers, eating good pie, and the feeling was so uncomplicated and so unfamiliar that it took her a moment to name it. Home, she thought. This is what home feels like. Not the building, not the land. The feeling of being exactly where you are supposed to be with people who have seen what you are and found it sufficient. She had been looking for this her entire life without knowing what it was called. The letter from Ruth arrived the following Tuesday. It had been traveling for 9 days, which meant Ruth had written it before the hearing, before the verdict, before any of the things that had happened in the past 2 weeks. She had written it from the practical daily life of Laramie, reporting on the weather and the neighbor's new horse and their father's knee, which was bothering him again, and asking in her direct and entirely Ruth way whether Clara had run away yet, or whether it was turning out better than she'd expected. Clara sat at the kitchen table and read it twice. Then she picked up her pen and wrote back, and the letter she wrote was 8 pages long, which was 7 pages longer than she had intended. She wrote about the accounts and the surveys, and the courtroom, and Judge Colum's expression when Sutton declined to answer. She wrote about Alderton saying she should consider the law. She wrote about Mrs. Delaney's pie. She wrote about Danny Alcott's face when he said, "We're real glad you came." She wrote about William. Not everything. Some things were too new and too carefully held to translate yet into the medium of a letter. But she wrote enough that Ruth, who knew her sister, would understand. She finished the letter and addressed it and set it by the door to go out with the Morning Post writer. Then she sat for a moment with her hands on the table. She thought about the version of herself that had sat at a kitchen table in Laramie 7 weeks ago, staring at a broker's letter and trying to decide whether hope was something she could afford. She thought about what she would say to that woman if she could. She thought she would say, "Go. Don't make yourself smaller than the opportunity. The world will try to do that for you. Don't help it." She picked up her pen again and added a postscript to Ruth's letter. "You were right," she wrote. "You were right about all of it. Don't let anyone tell you that you weren't." Alderton rode out on Wednesday morning with the civil suit paperwork, the financial restitution claim that would move through a separate proceeding which he estimated would take 3 to 4 months, but which, given the documentation, he expected to resolve in William's favor. He shook William's hand at the gate, and then without particular ceremony turned to Clara and shook hers as well. "I meant what I said about the law," he told her. "I know," she said. "I might take you up on it someday." He rode away. William watched him go. "Would you?" he said. "Would I what?" "Study law." Clara thought about it seriously, which was the only way she thought about things. "I don't know," she said. "I think what I like is the problem solving. The law is a tool for that. But so are accounts, so is running a ranch. She looked at the road where Alderton had gone. I think what I've learned is that I'm not limited to one kind of problem. William stood beside her at the gate. No, he said. You're not. They stood for a moment in the morning quiet. I need to ask you something, William said. Ask, she said. The wedding, he said. You said you wanted a real one. She had said that. In the dark of Wednesday night before the hearing, sitting on her bed with too many thoughts to manage, she had said it without planning to. She had not mentioned it since. I did say that, she said. I've been thinking about it. He kept his eyes on the road. She had noticed that he looked at middle distances when he was working up to something he cared about saying correctly. I've been thinking that we have done this whole thing backward. You came here under an arrangement. We found a fraud. We built a legal case. We won a hearing. A pause. We have done approximately everything except the basic thing. The basic thing, she said. Getting to know each other without a crisis happening, he said. Clara found herself almost laughing. That's fair. So I was thinking, he said, that we do this properly. Give it time. Let the civil case resolve. Let the ranch settle back into its regular rhythms. He turned to look at her. And in the spring, if you're willing, we have a wedding that is actually about the two of us and not about anything else. In the spring, she said. May maybe. When the garden is going. She thought about this garden she had been building. The beds she had turned and amended and planted in careful rows the seedlings that were already showing in the cold frames she'd built along the south side of the house. She thought about what it would look like in May. May, she said. If that works for you. She looked at him. It works for me, she said. He nodded with the particular satisfaction of a man who has asked the right question and received the answer he was hoping for, and is going to allow himself to feel good about that without making a performance of it. They walked back toward the house. William, she said. You said in the spring if you're willing. She kept her voice even. Did you think I might not be willing? He was quiet for a moment. I thought, he said carefully, that you had done a great deal for this ranch in a very short time, and that you deserved to be asked rather than assumed. Clara was quiet. That, she said, is the right answer. I've been working on it, he said. The weeks after the hearing had a different quality than the weeks before. The urgency that had driven everything that had kept Clara at the study desk until midnight, that had sharpened every conversation and loaded every casual interaction with the awareness of what was at stake. That urgency was gone, and in its place was something softer and more complicated. The ordinary work of a ranch. The ordinary work of two people learning each other without a crisis as the organizing structure. It was harder in some ways. The crisis had given them a shared purpose and a clear direction and a reason to communicate constantly, practically, without any of the awkwardness that came with simply being two people who had made a commitment to each other and were now living it out in real time. Without the crisis, Clara noticed things she had not had attention for before. She noticed that William drank his coffee before it was fully brewed and always burned his tongue and never adjusted his timing, despite this happening every morning. She noticed that he was better with the horses than with any other living thing. They responded to him with an ease and immediacy that she found quietly beautiful. She noticed that he read in the evenings and that his reading habits were entirely unpredictable history. Agricultural journals, a novel from the lending library in town that he had not told anyone about, and which she had found face down on the study chair and recognized as a very good one. She mentioned the novel. You're not supposed to have seen that, he said. I wasn't snooping, she said. It was on the chair. I left it there for 10 minutes. It's a good book, she said. He looked at her with an expression that was somewhere between defensive and resigned. I know it's a good book, he said. That's why I was reading it. I've read it twice, she said. A pause. Do you want to discuss it? He said, in the tone of a man who was asking a question he hadn't expected to ask and was surprised to find he meant it. Yes, she said. They discussed it for 2 hours that evening. And at some point, Mrs. Delaney came in to bank the fire and found them both talking at once about a minor character in the 3rd chapter. And she turned around and went back to the kitchen with an expression that was for Margaret Delaney as close to a smile as her face generally allowed. The letter from Edgar Sutton arrived on a Friday 3 weeks after the hearing. It was not addressed to William. It was addressed to Clara. She stood at the kitchen table and looked at the envelope for a long moment before she opened it. The letter was 2 pages. It was, she realized as she read, an attempt at contrition, partially genuine, she thought, and partially calculated in the way of men who had spent enough time being strategic that they could no longer entirely distinguish between the two. Sutton wrote that he had underestimated her. He wrote that he had looked at what Edgar Sutton's broker report described and seen an opportunity and not a person. He wrote that he regretted the scheme, though he spent considerably more words describing the professional consequences for himself than the harm to the Hartwells, which told her something accurate about the depth of the regret. At the bottom he wrote, "You were not what I expected, Mrs. Hartwell. That was my error, not yours." She read the letter twice. Then she folded it, placed it in the file where she was keeping all documents related to the civil case, and went back to the garden. She did not respond to it. Some things didn't require a response. Some things just required you to receive them and keep moving, which was something she had been doing her entire life, and which she was increasingly understanding was not a small skill. It was the kind of skill that looked like nothing from the outside, receiving and keeping moving, absorbing what the world sent, and continuing forward anyway. But that was in fact the architecture of endurance. She had endurance. She had always had it. She had just never been in a place before where endurance was respected as the force it actually was. The civil case resolved in March, 2 months ahead of Alderton's estimate. The documentation was, as Judge Cullum had noted, unusually clear. The financial restitution was ordered in full, every irregular payment traced, and recovered the Water Authority fraud, addressed separately, with additional penalties. Sutton's brokerage license suspended, pending a criminal investigation that the territorial marshal had opened, based on the referral from the hearing. Boyd Ritter received a reduced judgment in exchange for his full cooperation. He left Red Willow 3 days after the ruling. Clara did not know where he went and did not ask. Hiram Brooks withdrew from the border dispute without going to further litigation. He issued a statement through his lawyer that was written in the language of procedural withdrawal, and said nothing about the fraudulent survey, which was already stricken from the record and could not be legally referenced. Clara thought this was exactly the kind of outcome that looked like nothing on paper and meant everything in practice. 600 acres of northern range. The creek access, the summer grazing capacity, that was the difference between a thriving ranch and a struggling one. All of it intact. She told William the news when Alderton's telegram arrived. William read the telegram. He set it on the desk. He looked at Clara with the expression she had catalogued since her first day, the one she had never quite been able to name, the one that had been building quietly across all their conversations and all their work beside each other evenings. She thought she could name it now. "It's over," he said. "It's over," she confirmed. "Everything we needed to protect is protected," she said. He nodded slowly. He looked at the telegram again, and then at the study around them, the organized shelves, the carefully maintained ledgers, the small things Clara had added over 3 months that had made the room without anyone formally deciding this into the working heart of the ranch. "I need to say something to you," he said. "You said that before," she said. "The night before the hearing. I know. I'm saying it again." He looked at her directly. "I have been trying for 3 months to find the adequate version of what I want to say, and I have come to the conclusion that there isn't one. There is no version that is proportional to what you've done. Not just the case. Not just the accounts." He paused. "You came here willing to be sent back. You came here having been told your entire life that you were the wrong kind of woman for any situation that required someone better. And you walked into a fraud and a land scheme, and a town full of people who had already decided what they thought of you, and you did not shrink. Not once." Clara felt the thing behind her eyes again. She blinked it back. "I almost did," she said. "There were moments." "I know," he said. "I saw them. And you didn't. I almost packed my bag, she said. It came out quieter than she intended, more honest. The night after Ritter came to the study door, and I realized he knew what I was doing, I almost packed it. What stopped you? She thought about it. I thought about what I would be going back to, she said. And I thought about what I would be leaving behind. She looked at the desk, at the ledgers, at her own handwriting and the margins of the notes she had built over weeks. And I decided that for once in my life, I wanted to stay somewhere long enough to see what happened. William crossed the room. He stood in front of her close enough that she had to look up to meet his eyes. I am glad, he said, every single day that you stayed. She looked at him. All of it was present in this room at this moment. Every careful conversation, every plainly said thing, every lamplit evening, every document and number, and hard-won proof. All of the 36 days it had taken to get here. All of the 25 years before them that had been building without either of them knowing it toward this specific moment in this specific room. William, she said. Clara, he said. I think, she said, that I might be in love with you. She had not planned to say it. She had been sitting with the knowledge of it for approximately 3 weeks, handling it carefully, waiting for the right moment, fully intending to say it in a considered and composed way at a time of her own choosing. This was apparently not going to be that moment. He looked at her for a long moment. I know, he said. She blinked. You know. I've known for about 6 weeks, he said. That is, she stopped. You could have said something. You weren't ready, he said simply. And I wasn't going to say it first because I didn't want you to feel obligated. You had enough obligations. She stared at him. You've known for 6 weeks, she said. Yes. And you waited. Yes. Because you didn't want me to feel obligated. Yes, he said with the patient steadiness of a man who knew he had done the right thing and was willing to let her be exasperated about it. Clara looked at him for a long moment. That is, she said, the most thoughtful and infuriating thing anyone has ever done for me. Something broke open in his face, then, genuine, unguarded, the laugh of a man who has been careful for a very long time and has finally found a place where he doesn't have to be. I love you, he said, in case that part needed saying too. It did, she said. It definitely did. He took her hand, not dramatically, not with any of the theatrical weight the moment might have supported. Just took her hand, the way he did everything deliberately, unhurriedly, with the complete intention of a man who had decided where he was going and was communicating it without excess. She held it. They were married in May on a Saturday with the garden in full color behind the house, and every person from the ranch and half the town of Red Willow standing in the yard. Mrs. Delaney wore a hat with a blue ribbon that Clara suspected she had owned for years and had been waiting for an occasion that justified it. Danny Alcott stood in the third row and cried with the uncomplicated openness of a young man who had not yet learned to be embarrassed by the right things moving him. Old Pete Callahan stood at the back with his hat in his hands and did not cry, but he kept his eyes on Clara throughout the ceremony, with the expression of a man revising an earlier conclusion and finding the revision satisfying. Ruth had come from Laramie. She arrived 2 days before the wedding and spent the first evening in the study, looking at Clara's work. The organized ledgers, the filed documents, the annotated case records, with an expression that started as pride and moved into something quieter and more complicated. You did all this, Ruth said. We did, Clara said. William and Alderton, and we're Clara, Ruth said. Clara stopped. You did this, Ruth said again, plainly in the voice she used when she needed her sister to hear something without the qualifications getting in the way. Except that. Clara looked at the study that had been the center of everything, the room she had walked into by accident, looking for the privy, and had never really left. All right, she said. Good, Ruth said. Now show me the garden. At the ceremony, the minister said the usual words, and Clara heard them, the way you heard music you had known a long time, familiar in structure, different now in what they carried. When he reached the part about what they were promising to each other, She felt William's hand tighten slightly on hers, just once, and she tightened back. They exchanged rings. The minister pronounced them married. And in the crowd, someone started clapping, and then everyone was clapping, and Danny Alcott let out a sound that was approximately a cheer, and Pete Callahan put his hat back on with the precise motion of a man completing a ceremony and returning to the world. Clara looked at William. He was looking at her. "Hello, Mrs. Hartwell," he said in the same quiet that he had used on the platform the day she arrived when he'd said her name for the first time, and the town had been watching, and she had been ready to be sent back. She was not ready to be sent back now. She was not going anywhere. "Hello," she said. 3 months later, on an ordinary Thursday evening, Clara was in the study when she heard a knock at the open door. It was Danny Alcott holding his hat and looking like he had something to say that he had rehearsed. "Ma'am," he said, "I've been offered a position on a ranch up in the Yellowstone Valley. Better pay more responsibility." He turned the hat in his hands. "The thing is, I wanted to ask you something before I decided." "Ask," she said. "Do you think I could do it?" he said. "Running operations at a bigger spread. I'm 22. They'd be trusting me with a lot." Clara looked at him. She thought about a 25-year-old woman who had stood in a kitchen in Laramie staring at a broker's letter and asking herself the same question. "Danny," she said, "what are you good at?" He thought about it. Horses, reading the cattle, getting people to work together without it being a big thing about it. "Then you're a ranch manager," she said. "That's exactly what a ranch manager does." She set down her pen. "The question is never whether you can do it. The question is whether you're willing to find out." He was quiet for a moment. "Were you scared?" he said. "When you first got here?" "Terrified," she said. "But you stayed." "I stayed," she said. "And I found out." Danny looked at her for a moment, with the expression of someone receiving information that is going to travel with them for a long time. "All right," he said. "I'll take the position." "Good," she said. "Thank you, ma'am." "Don't thank me," she said. "Go be good at it." He grinned the wide, uncomplicated grin of someone 22 years old, with a decision made and a direction clear, and left. Clara turned back to her work. Outside, the ranch moved in its regular rhythms. Cattle in the distance. A horse moving across the yard. The particular sound of evening settling over working land. She could hear William talking to Pete somewhere near the barn, the low back and forth of two men discussing something practical, and she listened to it the way she listened to the other ordinary sounds of this life, with the particular attention of someone who knows what it costs to arrive here and has decided to notice every day of it. She picked up her pen. There was a new ledger open on the desk. Not a crisis ledger, not a document for a court case, just the regular operational accounts for the next quarter. Feed projections, grazing schedules. The water rights review she had initiated with the territorial office, the small capital projects she and William had been planning for the South Pasture. Ordinary numbers, ordinary work, the best kind. She began to write, and the pen moved steadily across the page, and the lamp burned its clean light over everything. And Clara Hartwell, who had arrived in Red Willow, Montana, believing she was not enough and had stayed long enough to discover the truth, sat in the study that was hers, and did the work that was hers, and inhabited without apology and without reservation the life that had always been waiting for her to claim it. She had not needed to become someone else. She had only needed to become more fully herself. And that at last, completely and for good, was exactly what she had done.